When we hear the word interest today, it feels ordinary. A percentage, a calculation, a line in a bank contract. But for most of human history, interest wasn't just a number. It was power. And that power frightened the world's greatest religions. I want you to imagine an ancient village. No banks, no safety nets, no credit cards. A bad harvest hits, a family is starving. They borrow grain or silver just to survive. Now imagine that debt growing quietly over time. Not because the borrower failed, but because time itself was being charged. This is where the story of usury begins. The ancient reality of debt. In the ancient world, loans were rarely for business or investment. They were for survival, food, seeds, taxes, emergency medicine. And when interest was added, something dangerous happened. Debt stopped being temporary and became a trap. People lost their land, then their freedom, sometimes even their children. Religions didn't oppose interest because they hated money. They opposed it because they saw what it did to human dignity. Judaism, debt inside the family. Visual, desert, early Israelite settlements. In Judaism, the rule was clear. Do not charge interest to your brother. The key word is brother. Ancient Israel wasn't just a nation. It was a covenant family. Lending to one another wasn't business. It was mutual responsibility. Charging interest to a fellow Israelite meant profiting from shared hardship, breaking the moral bond of the community. That's why interest was allowed with outsiders, but not within the covenant. This wasn't about economics. It was about preserving social unity. Christianity, a radical moral turn. Visual, Roman roads, early Christian gatherings. Christianity took this idea even further. Jesus didn't speak like an economist. He spoke like a moral revolutionary. Lend, expecting nothing in return. To early Christians, usury wasn't just unfair, it was unchristlike. Why? Because Christianity centered on mercy over calculation, love over leverage, compassion over contracts. For centuries, the church banned all interest, not because money was evil, but because exploiting need was. Only much later, when trade expanded and economies changed, did Christianity slowly distinguish between exploitative usury and reasonable profit in commerce, but the original warning never disappeared. Islam, justice built into the system. Visual, Mecca, desert trade routes, Quranic manuscripts. Islam arrived into a world already drowning in debt. The Quran didn't condemn trade. It condemned riba, and riba wasn't just interest. It was guaranteed gain without risk, especially from the vulnerable. The logic was simple and powerful. If one person bears all the risk, while another profits no matter what, justice has already been violated. That's why Islam insists on risk sharing. Real economic activity. Ethical finance tied to productivity. Riba wasn't just immoral. It was socially destructive, the shared moral thread. Across all three religions, the message is strikingly similar. Wealth should circulate, not suffocate. Time alone should not enslave a human being. Need should never be a profit opportunity. They understood something modern societies are relearning. Unchecked debt reshapes power, and when power concentrates, communities fracture. Why this still matters today. Visual, modern banks, credit cards, payday loan signs. Today we don't lose our children to debt, but we lose peace, stability, freedom of choice. Interest is now normalized, but the ethical question remains, at what point does profit turn into exploitation? The ancient religions weren't anti-growth, they were anti-predatory systems. And maybe that's why their warnings still echo, even in a world of algorithms and global finance. Closing, calm, reflective. So when Islam, Christianity, and Judaism warned against usury, they weren't rejecting money, they were protecting people. And maybe they were warning us about a future we're still trying to understand. But history doesn't stand still. As societies grew, something changed. Trade expanded, cities rose, empires connected distant worlds. Money was no longer used only to survive, it was used to build. And that's where the moral tension began, from survival loans to commercial capital. Visual ships, caravans, medieval marketplaces. For the first time, loans weren't just for bread. They were for ships, workshops, long journeys across unknown seas. Now the borrower wasn't starving. They were taking a risk. And the lender asked a new question. If my money is tied up for years, if I could lose everything, should time and risk have value? Religions had to confront a new reality. Judaism, law adapts without losing its soul. Jewish scholars noticed the shift early. They didn't abandon their ethics. They refined them. Through legal instruments like the heter iska, a loan could be restructured as a partnership. Profit was allowed, but only when risk was shared, loss was possible, exploitation was prevented. The principle stayed intact. Money may grow, but not by crushing the vulnerable. Christianity, from absolute ban to moral distinction. Visual, medieval Europe, cathedrals, merchants' guilds. For centuries, Christianity held the line. All interest was forbidden. But Europe was changing fast. Merchants needed capital. Kingdoms needed credit. Trade demanded liquidity. So theologians asked a dangerous question. Is every form of interest sinful, or only interest that feeds on desperation? Gradually, a distinction emerged. Usury, exploitative, excessive, unjust. Interest, compensation for risk, inflation, opportunity cost. The ban softened, but the warning stayed. Profit was permitted. Greed was not. Islam, a line that stayed firm. Visual, Islamic Golden Age, scholars, trade routes. Islam, however, refused to blur the line. Instead of modifying interest, it reimagined finance itself. Trade was encouraged, investment was celebrated, but riba remained forbidden. Why? Because Islam saw something timeless. Once money guarantees profit without effort or risk, it stops serving society and starts ruling it. So Islamic finance developed alternatives, profit and loss sharing, asset-backed transactions, real economic activity, not faster money, but fairer money. The moral fault line. At this point, civilizations stood at a crossroads. One path said, money is a tool. The other whispered, money can become a master. Religions weren't naive. They knew economies needed growth, but they feared something deeper, a world where debt defines human worth. Debt as control, visual, chains dissolving into paperwork and contracts. In ancient times, debt used chains. In modern times, it uses paperwork, different tools, same pressure. That's why religious warnings weren't just financial rules. They were early systems of social protection. They ask questions we still avoid. Who benefits when debt grows? Who bears the risk? And who pays when the system fails? Setting the stage for today. By the time we reach the modern era, interest has become normal, legal, expected, but the moral discomfort never vanished. It simply went quiet, until crises bring it back. Closing. Reflective, slow fade. In part 1, we saw why religions feared interest. In part 2, we saw how the world justified it. In part 3, we'll ask the hardest question of all. Were the religions wrong, or were they early? If you want, I can continue with part 3, focusing on modern debt crises and religious warnings, capitalism versus moral economics, Islamic finance versus global banking, or a powerful, reflective conclusion episode.